Welcome to this presentation on the Financial Handbook for Independent Training Providers. My name is Robert Foster. I work on the Financial Frameworks team for the ESFA, which is part of our Finance and Provider Market Oversight Directorate. Our team has been responsible for developing the handbook with assistance from colleagues in the agency and across the wider Department for Education. In this session, we will cover, firstly, an overview of the ITP sector, including what it looks like, how we've engaged with the sector to inform the handbook, and the findings of that consultation. Secondly, we will look at the rationale and aims of the handbook, including why we've introduced the handbook and why we've used the format that we have. Thirdly, we will cover the broad content of the handbook, including a breakdown of the different sections and the various financial management and governance arrangements that are detailed within it. Finally, we will look at what comes next in terms of the handbook and when it becomes effective and what ITPs can do before and after then. The ITP sector is a very important part of the education landscape and is critical in delivering skills to adults up and down the country. Last year, we funded around 1,200 ITPs under a variety of funding streams. We are acutely aware of the very diverse nature of the ITP sector, with organisations ranging from small family businesses to large nationwide training providers, with charities, community groups and others also playing an important role in skills delivery. Last year, around 380 ITPs received over £1 million in funding from ESFA, with around 40 of those in receipt of over £8 million. The bulk of ITPs we fund receive between £100,000 and £1 million a year. Less than 250 receive less than £100,000 a year, although these are often providing vital niche services for the sector. These figures have helped us with how we've put this handbook together, which we will tell you more about during the presentation. The development of the Financial Handbook for ITPs has involved partnership working between the ESFA and ITPs, as well as AELP, the biggest sector representative body. We want to thank everybody in the sector who was engaged with and informed the development of the handbook. Around 40 ITPs attended initial workshops that helped us to put a framework together. Over 220 ITPs completed a detailed survey which enabled us to understand existing good practice in the sector and where any gaps exist. Finally, several ITPs have reviewed drafts of the full handbook, enabling refinement of the document ahead of the publication. Since the beginning of the development, the Association of Employer and Learning Providers, AELP, has provided sound advice and support to help us put together this final product. 223 ITPs responded to a survey we conducted to establish the existing picture in the sector on financial management and governance, and to find out what the sector might want from a financial handbook. This was a much higher response rate than most surveys get, so it gave us a lot of confidence to use the findings to help inform the handbook. In addition, the respondees were a wide mix of the sector in terms of their funding levels and entity types, so it provided a high level of representation. In terms of governance, we found out that higher funded ITPs are more likely to have non-executive directors and audit committees. We were encouraged to see how many ITPs are already committed to following a published code of governance. In addition, the survey provided information to enable us to see how ITPs ensure that their ILR data is robust and accurate. In relation to financial management and oversight, we found that most of the sector have processes in place to understand and manage risk. From the survey and other consultation, we have also learned a lot about how and when different types of ITPs put together their annual accounts. So this has enabled us to think about how earlier submission of accounts could help us to help ITPs. We also identified that there are potential gaps around counter fraud and fraud awareness in the sector, which we hope to tackle through this handbook. With regard to assurance arrangements, we found large parts of the sector already have internal and external audit processes in place, and the findings enabled us to pitch these elements of the handbook accordingly. Overall, the survey helped us to see areas where processes are already strong and other areas where we identified gaps, which the handbook aims to address to benefit the sector as a whole. We've put together this handbook to help give ITPs certainty and support with their financial management and governance, and to provide additional assurance that public funds are being protected and used effectively. The framework we've put together will give ITPs clarity on where there is an expectation to have a particular process or arrangement in place, or where we recommend something as good practice. We've worked in partnership with the sector to ensure the handbook is supportive. Part of this has involved recognising the full diversity of the sector and avoiding implementing a one-size-fits-all solution. The handbook will support the sector by showing what good practice looks like, so ITPs can make informed choices, even if a particular element might not be mandatory for them. Above all, we want the handbook to support ITPs to enhance their financial management and governance processes. As an agency, we are responsible for assuring the funds we issue. The handbook will help to do this by setting the parameters that create a robust fiscal environment and by enabling the earlier identification and management of risk. The handbook itself begins with an introduction from the Minister for Skills, Robert Halfon, and a foreword from the ESFA Chief Executive, David Withy. Both explain how the handbook aims to expand on the great work that ITPs do already by providing additional structure and ideas for strong financial management and governance. There are 6 main sections to the handbook. Part 1 provides the background to the handbook, including details of partnership working with the sector. It also explains the matrix system used in the handbook and the related aspects, which we will cover in a moment. Finally, it looks into the future about the transition to compliance with the handbook and how it might evolve in future editions. Part 2 reminds ITPs about some of their existing responsibilities, including those of a contractual and statutory nature. Parts 3, 4 and 5 cover the 3 key elements of the handbook, which are governance, financial management and oversight, and assurance. We will cover these in detail later in the presentation. Part 6 provides a reminder of the existing oversight and intervention methods used by ESFA to ensure that ITPs are operating appropriately and effectively as per the terms of their contracts and funding agreements. As explained previously, the ITP sector is extremely diverse in many different ways, so we've had to think of ways to put together a handbook that works for the sector and the ESFA, but is proportional to different parts of the sector. The way we've done this is through the use of funding groups to categorise ITPs and through applicability criteria to show how different bits of the handbook apply to those different funding groups. The 4 funding groups are shown on the left-hand side of this slide, and full details are provided in the handbook itself as to how each ITP should calculate which group they are in. The applicability criteria are also explained fully in the handbook, but as a general guide, some elements are identified as required for ITPs in particular funding groups. Others are recommended best practice to consider if you don't have in place already, and some elements are discretionary. The type of arrangements the handbook covers, which you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, are fully covered in the next few slides. Whilst rather dramatically entitled The Matrix, this is a summary table of the components that make up the handbook. The matrix lists the financial management and governance arrangements covered in the handbook and to what extent they apply to ITPs within the different funding groups. We will go through these arrangements in more details over the next few slides. Having appropriate levels of governance is clearly important to any organisation. This might vary quite a bit for ITPs dependent on their size and structure. With this in mind, the handbook requires that the very highest funded ITPs have non-executive directors or equivalent independent oversight, and an audit and risk committee to ensure a high level of independent scrutiny. Submitting timely and accurate ILR data is critical for the proper use of public funds, and the handbook therefore requires that all ITPs in receipt of over £1 million a year have a funding compliance scrutiny function, and we recommend this for most other ITPs also. Compliance with a relevant published code of governance gives extra confidence to any funder about an organisation, and we reference various codes in the handbook that can be followed and have set levels of expectation accordingly. Finally, on governance, we continue to require all ITPs to comply with contractual subcontracting arrangements, including those set out in the subcontracting standard. This slide relates specifically to the submission of annual accounts to the ESFA. We've spoken to the sector about this as we recognise the fine balance between having earlier sight of accounts and the advantages that this brings, with the need to give ITPs sufficient time to put together accurate and, where appropriate, externally audited accounts. We have also looked at other parts of the education sector and the timescales for academy trusts and colleges to provide their annual accounts. For all but the lowest funded ITPs, this means that the period for submission of accounts will move gradually to 5 months after their year end. We recognise that this will be a shift for some ITPs, and so there will be a significant lead-in period to enable different groups of ITPs to adapt to this change over 2 to 3 years. Some ITPs have established patterns for producing their accounts, and this can be particularly complex where group structures exist, for example. We will continue to listen to ITPs during the transition period and consider any concerns. The existing timelines for submission of accounts are based largely on Companies House and Charity Commission deadlines, and this leads to ESFA reviewing untimely accounts. This often means it is too late to identify risk and support ITPs, leading to provider failure and disruption for learners. In addition to the submission of accounts, there are a number of other financial management and oversight arrangements referenced in the handbook. We have a minimum requirement that most ITPs maintain an internal cash flow forecast. In addition, some ITPs are also asked to submit forecasts to ESFA along with other information, and further details of this are provided in the handbook. Our research has indicated there are gaps in the sector in relation to counter-fraud and fraud awareness. This is a risk both to ITPs and the funds they receive from the department and ESFA. The handbook therefore requires ITPs in receipt of over £1 million per year to have appropriate counter-fraud policies and training in place for staff, and we recommend this for most other ITPs also. The handbook includes details of what to include in a counter-fraud policy. Understanding and managing risk is critical for any provider, and the handbook requires all ITPs in receipt of over £1 million per year to have a clear suite of policies and procedures in place to do this. These include having a risk management policy, maintaining a risk register, having a business continuity plan, and ensuring conflicts of interest are recorded. We also recommend this to most other ITPs. Much of this handbook is about creating an effective and transparent financial environment, but when things are not being done correctly, it needs to be reported to protect the provider themselves and the public money they receive. The handbook therefore requires most ITPs to have a whistleblowing policy and clearly states some of the elements it needs to contain, including how to make direct disclosures of irregularity to the ESFA. In this section of the handbook, we also remind ITPs of their obligation to provide any information relating to financial health as per any request from the department or ESFA. ESFA undertakes a variety of assurance work each year over the funds that we allocate, but it is important that ITPs take their own steps to assure the effectiveness of their operations. The handbook requires ITPs in receipt of over £1 million per year from DfE and ESFA to appoint external auditors to audit their annual accounts, given the significant values of funds these ITPs are receiving. This will already be a legal obligation for many of the ITPs in scope of this requirement. It will be phased in over a period of time to enable ITPs to adapt and will only become applicable for accounts where the accounting period commences after the 1st of August 2025. Feedback of audit issues to ITPs in the form of management letters from the external auditor form an important part of external audit, and the handbook requires the very highest funded ITPs to share these management letters with the ESFA to assist with identifying any risks to funds, so the ITP can be supported accordingly. This is also recommended for ITPs in receipt of over £1 million per year from the department. Internal scrutiny of an ITP's control environment is likely to lead to better external audit outcomes, and the handbook also requires the very highest funded ITPs to have formalised internal review processes in place, and we recommend this for any ITPs in receipt of £1 million per year. This would involve review of internal policies and procedures relating to financial management and governance, and the handbook provides further details on what this could include. So what happens next? Whilst we're publishing the handbook now, it is not effective until the 1st of August this year. So ITPs have an opportunity to digest the content, work out what is applicable to them, and adapt accordingly where required. Clauses requiring ITPs to comply with the handbook will be written into relevant contracts of service. Most importantly, we want to continue to work in partnership with the sector to further develop and enhance the handbook over time, and ITPs can provide feedback on the handbook via the link shown at the bottom of this slide. The feedback survey can also be found with communications supporting the launch of the handbook. Thank you for listening to this presentation. We hope the handbook will be a useful tool to support you with your financial management and governance, and we look forward to working with the sector on further enhancing the handbook and developing best practice in the future. Thank you.